And once we know what we're going to be building, now let's get to work. In order to follow along with the video, you'll need a starter project, and you can get one at johnsmilga.com. Again, the URL is www.johnsmilga.com. Look for the project, more specifically, Node and Express one. And both of these links go to the same repo. So just click on any of them and then just get hold of the repo. So in my case, I think I'm going to go with clone option. So I'm back in my terminal. I'll zoom in. We're going to go with CD desktop. So I'll set it up on a desktop. And then, of course, I go with git clone and then copy and paste the URL. And once you get the repo, then let me showcase what you'll find inside. So drag and drop. And in here, you'll find the Node tutorial that we worked on, the Express tutorial, and of course, the task manager. And more specifically, in the task manager, you'll find the final folder. So this is a complete source code. However, there's one gotcha that I want to talk about where you will need a database connection string in order to spin it up. So don't just go there and then run npm install and then npm start and then get mad if the project doesn't start up. So essentially, in order for everything to work, you need to set up .env file and in there set up a variable by the name of Mongo URI and set it equal to connection string. And of course, I'm going to cover that later on in the videos. So that's about final. And as far as the starter, if you watch the tutorial part, this should look very familiar.
This is Webflow. Meet the design tool from the future, the most powerful visual
file, and in there set up a variable by the name of Mongo URI and set it equal to connection string. And of course, I'm going to cover that later on in the videos. So that's about final. And as far as the starter, if you watch the tutorial part, this should look very familiar. So essentially, in the public one, we have the front-end application. Again, not something we're going to work on. We're going to work on a backend, but since I want to showcase how everything is going to look with a real app, that's why you have there the public folder. And as a side note, if you're interested in just HTML and CSS, you can actually find the same exact project in my HTML and CSS course. And then also we have git ignore. So essentially in this file, we say which files are going to be ignored by the source control. And I'll talk about it a bit more when we're setting up the .env file. Then we have app.js with straight up console log. And then in the package.json, you'll find all our dependencies, which at the moment are .env, Express, and Mongoose. Now, of course, in tutorial, we only got familiar with Express, but as we progress with the project, of course, I'll cover the other two as well. And in order to have a smooth development process, I also set up NodeMon as a dev dependency, and then the command to start it up is npm start. That should do it for the setup, and I think now we're ready to start working on a project. And once we're familiar with the setup, let's kick things into gear and actually start working on a project. And the first thing that you need to do is to navigate to the starter folder. Again, you're looking for the third project, the task manager, and then more specifically, the starter folder. And I think the fastest way to navigate there is by just typing CD and then grab the starter folder and drop it here. And then once you're in a starter, before you do anything, make sure that you install all the packages. And of course, we do that by running npm install. And then once all the packages are in place, in order to spin up the NodeMon, we need to go with npm start. Unless, of course, you want to change it to a different command. If that's the case, then make the changes and then use that command instead. So in my case, I'll just wait a little bit. I mean, it shouldn't take too long. There's not that many packages in there. And then once I have all the packages in place, then of course, like I said, we're going to go with npm start. And if you see task manager in the console, we are in good shape. Now let's set up the most basic Express server, essentially is just going to be listening for one route /hello, and it's going to be on port 3000. Now, if you want to jog your memory and test it up yourself, just pause the video and resume once you're done. If you don't want to do that, just keep on watching the video. And the way we set up the most basic Express server is by setting up a variable by the name of Express. Then we'll set it equal to require, and that's going to be equal to our Express package. Then we need to initialize it. So we go with app, and that is equal to Express, and we invoke it. And then, unlike the previous examples, we'll actually set up a variable by the name of port. And for time being, we'll hardcode this to 3000, but eventually there's going to be more code. And I'll talk about the reasoning later. So for now, just set up the variable and we'll be in good shape. And in here, we need to go with app.listen, of course. And first thing we pass in is the port. And the second is the console log. So we go here with some kind of text. And I'm going to go with server is listening on port. And then, of course, we pass in the port value. And I always like to add those 3 dots as well. So I'll do it in this case. And then I'll open up my console. The moment I have server is listening on port 3000, which is just awesome. So now let's also set up that one lonely route. So above the port, I'm going to go with my comment routes, and then we'll just say app.get. So this is going to be a GET request. Now, what is going to be the URL? Well, we'll go with / and hold.
Hmm.
So that's going to be the path. And then, of course, we have the callback function once the user hits the route. And we're looking for a rec and res, so request and response. And we simply want to go with res.send, and then we'll pass task, manager, and app. So I'll save it here. I'll navigate to the browser, app. And then we'll pass task. And we simply want to go with res.send, and then we'll pass task, manager, and app. So I'll save it here. I'll navigate to the browser, and I'm looking for port 3000, of course. And then we'll go with hello. And if we see task manager app displayed in the browser, then of course we are off to the great start. Beautiful. And once we have the bones in place, next, let's take a look at our application. So so we can decide what routes eventually we're going to have. And I can see that I'm getting all my tasks. So
What's
there
going on,
will
buddy? How
definitely
you
be
doing?
a get request that gets me all my items. Now I can also create a new task. So there will be a post request that can create a new task. Now we can also delete one. So there will be a route for that. And if we click on edit, we open up a new page. And in here, we get info about a specific route. So there will be a get request that just gets me info about one single task. And also, we'll have the ability to edit. So if I change the completed from true to false, and if I successfully edit that, then if I go back to the tasks, of course, in here, I don't see the check mark, which means that I successfully edited the task. And what that means is that there's also a route for the update. And in summary, our routes are going to look something like this, where there will be a get request on API version 1 and then tasks. So this will get all the tasks. Then there will be a post request on API version 1 tasks. Again, the same URL, however, the method is different. So totally different functionality. In this case, we'll create a new task. And then we have get route with params. So with the ID of the task that gets us that single task. And of course, one for update and one for delete. And since there's a lot to unpack over here, I'll spend the next video on the reasons behind such API structure. All right, so let's go step by step. And probably your first question is, well, why do we go here with / API and then version 1? And essentially, that is just a convention. We need to understand that on the server, we also might have different routes, not just the routes for the API. So, for example, you could be serving a index page here on a /, meaning there could be a nice index HTML page that you're serving up over here. And then also on the same server, you have the API routes. So convention is effectively just to signal that all of these are the API routes. Now, as far as the version, well, as you're setting up the API, eventually you might want to change some things. So it's easier if you have this version, because that way, when you create a new one, then you can just direct everybody to API and then version 2, 3, or whatever. And while we're still on that same note, why don't we navigate to a Hacker News one, the one that I showed you previously with Algolia, and you'll notice exactly the same setup, where essentially they go with domain and then / and then API and then version number 1. And that leads me to my next point, where if you're ever in doubt or if you're just interested on different setups, just check out the different APIs. There's tons of APIs out there, and you can just look for one, then take a look at their setup, and then decide if what they're doing makes sense to you. Then, of course, you can implement in your project. If not, then just move on to a different API, and eventually you'll find a setup that makes the most sense to you. After that, you're probably wondering, okay, I understand the API and then version. That kind of makes sense. But why do we go here with get and then tasks? Then we have the post and the same tasks. And then for get, patch, and delete, we go to the tasks, but then we're looking for the colon. Why isn't this written in a different way where we're just looking for a single task or something along those lines? And to give you a short answer, that is a convention. But since there's more to it, I want to actually cover that in a few videos. So I want to set up the basic routes with just some simple responses. Then I want to open up the Postman and do a little bit of setup over there. And then right before we start setting up the database, I actually want to spend one video on just talking about the convention. And then lastly, if you remember in tutorial, we worked with put, and now for the update, we're using patch. And I know that this might be a little bit frustrating to you, but that's also going to be something that we will cover a bit later once we have already a working application, because that way I believe that I can give you a solid example of the differences between the put and patch. That's about it for the general route structure. So now let's start implementing it. Not bad, not bad. I think we're good with the general structure. So now let's start implementing it. And I want to right away set up the router as well as the controllers. And if you remember at the very end of the Express tutorial, I covered why is that necessary. And essentially the short answer is that as our application grows bigger, it's not going to be very sustainable if we'll just start dumping everything in the app.js. And for time being, I just want to create this one route. Now, as far as the response, it's just going to be a simple string that says, hey, here are all the items or something along those lines. And then once we have that one in place, then we'll add the rest of them, and then we'll test it out in the Postman. So let's get cracking. And I'm going to go with new folder. So here will be all the controllers. And in this case, I'm going to be looking for the tasks. And I also want to set up a routes folder. So in the routes folder, we'll go with new file.
All right, so in the starter folder, we're going to create controllers and route. Starter, new directory, route, new directory, controllers, and then in routes folder.
And same thing. We're going to go with tasks.js. And then as far as the setup in the routes, we need to look for the express router. So say const express, and that is equal to require. And then again, we'll look for express. And this should be a refresher because we did cover that at the end of the express tutorial. So just to jog your memory, if we go back to express tutorial, and then more specifically, we'll look for the final one, the file 13, the router people shows a basic router example. And essentially, we have two options. We can either go with router get and then add all the controllers one by one, or we can actually chain them together, where we go with a router and then use a route. So this is going to be the main route, in our case, API version 1, and then tasks, and then we chain get and post. And I think I'm going to go with this setup. So first, let's start by setting up the router, and that is equal to express, and then a router, we invoke it, and then eventually we'll import controllers. But for now, of course, we don't have any. So let's just leave that one blank, and we'll go with router, then route, like I said, then /, and then I want to go with get method. And for time being, I'll just hard code the response over here. So say rec and res dot and send. And like I said, we'll just start simply. So say all items. Now let's save that one. And then all the way in the bottom, we want to go with module exports, and that is equal to our router. So now back in the app.js, we want to import the router, we want to import our tasks, and we want to set up the middleware. So in here, let's just go with const and then routes, and that is equal to require. And then, like I said, we're going to be looking in the routes folder, and then more specifically, exports, and that is equal to our router. So now back in the app.js, we want to import the router, we want to import our tasks, and we want to set up the middleware. So in here, let's just go with const and then routes, and that is equal to require. And then, like I said, we're going to be looking in the routes folder, and then more specifically, we're looking for the tasks. And then right after this hello, and don't worry, we'll change that one a little bit later. For time being, it can just stay the way it is. We'll go with app.use, and then, of course, what route are we looking for? Well, we want to go with API, then version 1, and then tasks. So that's going to be that root route for the tasks router. And then we just want to go with our routes. And you know what? Let's just change it around. My bad. For some reason, I went with routes. Let's just call it tasks. I believe it's going to make a bit more sense. And since we'll be sending JSON from our application, for example, when we're creating a new task, and since I want to access
Uh,
that's going to be that root route for the tasks router. And then we just want to go with our routes. And you know what? Let's just change it around.
okay, that's what
For
I
some
did. I
reason,
was
I went with
confused.
routes. Let's just call it tasks. I believe it's going to make a bit more sense. And since we'll be sending JSON from our application, for example, when we're creating a new task, And since I want to access that data in my routes, what we need to do, of course, is get middleware that is built into Express. And that middleware is ExpressJS. So above the routes, we'll go here and I'll try to spell this correctly since that is always an issue. Hopefully this is correct, middleware. And then we'll just go with app.use and eventually we'll set up the static one as well. But since at the moment we have barely any routes, I'm just going to go with Express and JSON. If you remember, if we don't use this, then we won't have that data in rec.body. So I'll save it here and I'll leave the comments just so we all are on the same page. And before I test it out in the browser, let me just double check. So I'm using the middleware where I'm saying that I'm looking for API version 1 and then tasks. And then I pass in my router, my tasks router. And then in the router, effectively, I have this route path, which just matches whatever I pass over here. So again, I go with API version 1 and then tasks. And then I set up a get route where I manually pass in my controller. And here I just say res.send and I pass in a string of all items. And it looks about right. So let me go here and we're going to go with localhost 3000 since it's a get request. Of course, we can access it. Again, API version 1 and then tasks. And we should see a string of all items. And if we do, then of course, we're heading in the right direction. So the last thing that I want to do in this video is to first close my Express. And if we do, and we should see a version 1 and then tasks. And we should see a string of all items. And if we do, then of course, we're heading in the right direction. All items. And if we and we should see a version 1 and then tasks. And we should see a string of all items.
Okay, well, my shit didn't do that. I cannot get that. So I fucked some shit up. Let's see what I fuck up.
Here, let's just go with const and then routes, and that is equal to require. And then, like I said, we're going to be looking in the routes folder. And then more specifically, we're looking for the tasks. And then right after this hello, and don't worry, we'll change that one a little bit later. For time being, it can just stay the way it is. We'll go with app.use. And then, of course, what route are we looking for? Well, we want to go with API, then version 1, and then tasks. So that's going to be that route for the tasks router. And then we just want to go with our routes. And you know what? Let's just change it around. My bad. For some reason, I went with routes. Let's just call it tasks. I believe it's going to make a bit more sense. And since we'll be sending JSON from our application, for example, when we're creating a new task, and since I want to access that data in my routes, what we need to do, of course, is get middleware that is built into Express. And that middleware is ExpressJS. So above the routes, we'll go here and I'll try to spell this correctly since that is always an issue. Hopefully this is correct, middleware. And then we'll just go with app.use and eventually we'll set up the static one as well. But since at the moment we have barely any routes, I'm just going to go with Express and JSON. If you remember, if we don't use this, then we won't have that data in rec.body. So I'll save it here and I'll leave the comments just so we all are on the same page. And before I test it out in the browser, let me just double check. So I'm using the middleware where I'm saying that I'm looking for API version 1 and then tasks. And then I pass in my router, my tasks router. And then in the router, effectively, I have this route path, which just matches whatever I pass over here. So again, I go with API version 1 and then tasks. And then I set up a get route where I manually pass in my controller. And here I just say res.send and I pass in a string of all items. And it looks about right. So let me go here and we're going to go with localhost 3000 since it's a get request. Of course, we can access it. Again, API version 1 and then tasks. And we should see a string of all items. And if we do, then of course, we're heading in the right direction. So the last thing that I want to do in this video is to first close my Express tutorial one. And then in the controllers, we want to create a new file and we'll call this tasks.js. And again, just to jog your memory, the whole deal, why we're setting up separate routes and separate controllers, because if I'll try to jam everything in app.js, it's going to get messy pretty fast. So what I want to do right now is take this logic and place it in a separate file, because eventually, of course, there will be way more logic than just res.send. So I'm going to go to my controllers, and effectively, I want to create my function, the controller function, and I'm just going to go with const get all.
Okay, well, something I did fucked it up, and I didn't see where that was at. I go to /hello. I get that. That works just fine. Do I need that fucking backslash there? All right, I guess I needed that fucking / excuse me. All right, that fixed it. He made a new file here called task.js again. And in here, he is
And then tasks. And I'll set it up as an R function. I'm looking for a rec and res, and functionality will be exactly the same, res.send. And we're just going to go with all and then items. And then we're going to go with module exports. And since I'm going to add more functions in here, I'll right away export it as an object. So say get all tasks. That's when I'm exporting. And then back in the routes, of course, I want to access it. So I'll say here that I wanted the structure get all tasks from, and of course we need to require it, and get, and then we're going to go with module exports. And since I'm going to add more functions in here, I'll right away export it as an object. So say get all tasks. That's when I'm exporting, and then back in the routes, of course I want to access it. So I'll say here that I wanted the structure get all tasks from, and of course we need to require it. And in this case, we're looking in the controllers. So I'm going to go 2 levels up. I'm looking for controllers. and then more specifically task. So instead of hard coding this value, of course, I'll just pass it in and I'll say get all tasks. And if I go back to my URL and if I can still see all items, then of course we are in good shape. And let me just test it out where I'll change this around and I'll say all items from the file.
If you don't know the Ibotta Performance Network, this is you. 99% of paper coupons are never redeemed. What a waste. Get unprecedented scale with performance marketing efficiency with the Ibotta Performance Network.
And then if we go back, yep, we still have the correct result. And with this in place, now.
Oh, hold on a second.
This value from, and of course we need to require it. And in this case, we're looking in the controllers. So I'm going to go 2 levels up. I'm looking for controllers and then more specifically task. So instead of hard coding this value, of course, I'll just pass it in and I'll say get all.
All right, so that's good. Be get and then get all tasks.
All tasks. And if I go back to my URL and if I can still see all items, then of course we are in good shape. And let me just test it out where I'll change this around and I'll say all items from the file. And then if we go back, yep, we still have the correct result. And with this in place, now we can set up the same basic structure for the rest of the routes as well. Beautiful. And in the same fashion, let's set up the rest of the controllers. So we have the get one. Now I want to create one for the post, one for get, but that's going to be a single item. Then we also have one for patch and one for delete. And pretty much in all of them, the setup is going to be exactly the same as far as functionality. I'll just send back and I'll say what the controller is doing. Since, of course, we haven't connected to the database or anything like that. And I just need to come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to go with create task. And again, we have rec and res. And then we want to copy and paste since I want to speed this up. And I'll just say create task. Create task. And why don't we change this one around? And we'll say get all tasks. Now we want to copy and paste. And we'll have 3 more. We'll have one for getting the task. So get task. And here we'll say get single task. Then we'll have one for updating. And that's exactly how we'll call it. We'll say update task. And the same is going to be over here. And then the last one, of course, will be delete and then task.
Okay, so we're going to create task and we're going to get a get single task, LE task. I'm going to update task, delete task. Delete, update, get, create, get. I know I don't need to do this, but it doesn't bother me if I don't. Get single task, update a task, delete a task.
And you guessed it, we also need to change the text. And now, of course, we want to place that in the same object. So let's go with create task, then get task, then we have update task, and last one is delete task. And then back in the routes, of course, we want to import them. So say here, create task, get task, then update task, and delete one. And now we just need to set up the routes. If we take a look at the app.js, these two, the get and post, are going to go to API version 1 and then tasks. And then the rest of them are
create, get, update, delete. Create. Create, get, update, delete.
are going to be with the ID params. So same initial path, but then we'll just add the / and then ID. And that's, of course, is where we're going to pass the ID of the task. So where I have the get request.
Holy crap. This is the smallest beetle I've ever seen in my life. Oh, I mean, for it's a June bug beetle. Yeah, the June bug. And it's so small. I've never seen one this small. Let me throw it outside really quick. Back. Oh.
To get all the tasks, I'll chain dot post, and of course, which controller are we going to use? Of course, the create task one. And then we can simply go to the next line, and we'll go with router, then route, and like I said, we'll go with / and then ID, and then we're looking for get route, and that will be equal to get the single task. Then we'll set up our patch, and that will be equal to update task. And then lastly, we have delete one, and that will be equal to delete task. Now, since we know that we can only really test the single task and get all tasks, because that's the default method the browser performs, we'll stop over here. And in the next video, we'll spin up the postman to quickly test all of our routes.
Okay.
Because trust me, you don't want to go any further without knowing that at least the basic setup works. Because you can set up whatever logic you have over here. If there's a small bug and you cannot access these strings, then you'll spend way more time later searching for that bug. Nice job. And once we have the basic structure for all of our routes, now let's test them out in a post.
Well, that was fucking quick. No, that's in the task one. Yep. Yep.
For all of our routes. Now let's test them out in a postman. So I'm going to head back to my desktop. I'm looking for the postman. And since in this case, we'll spend way more time over here, I also want to cover some configuration options. So for starters, I want to switch to a dark mode because I think you'll appreciate that more. So if you want to do that as well, just go to the cog and then you're looking for the settings here. And then in the settings, just look for the themes. And of course, we have a dark theme as well. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do. Then we want to create a collection. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, since we'll be setting up multiple routes and they will reference the same application, it's just going to be easier as we create more and more applications. And in order to create that collection, we go here and click on creating the collection. And for starters, I just want to change the name. So I'll click on these three dots over here. And of course, we're looking for rename. And then I'm just going to go with 03 and we'll call this task manager. Now, if you're not happy with this name, of course, pick your own one. And once I have the task manager, then we want to start by creating a request. So we create a new request. It's going to be a GET request. And instead of typing all the time manually here, local and then host, and we're going to go with 3000 and then, of course, API version 1 and then tasks. What we want to do is set up a global variable. Now, there's multiple ways how we can do that. You can actually set up the environment. So think of this as a dev environment, and then you can have production environment. But in our case, we'll just set up this local host and then 3000, then API and version 1 simply as a variable. And you can do it from here. As you can see, they even give you a suggestion and all that. But I'm just going to go the long route where we click here on that I. And then notice I have already one for the URL. I have localhost 3000. And then I actually change it later to /API. So now what I want to do, I want to showcase how we can remove it. So if I go over here and if I remove it and I set up a new one, in this case, again, I'll call this URL. And then as far as this value, well, I'm just going to take this whole thing. So I'm going to go with localhost and then 3000. And of course, we're looking for API. And if you want, you can also include the tasks. But in my case, I'll stop right after the version 1. So let's copy that one. Again, I'm setting this up as a global, but you can set it up in the environment as well. And then once we add that, we should be able to right away access it. So now, of course, we just need to save it. And then in order to use it, we need to go back. And you know what? I'll remove everything for now. And if we go with these double curlies, this is going to give us access to those variables. And all the way in the bottom, we have the URL. And of course, as you can see, it is global. So in here, I'm going to go with URL. I'll close it. And then I'll go with / and then tasks. And once I save, I should get back get all tasks. And of course, that means that our basic setup works. And before we continue and do the same thing with the rest of the tasks, now, of course, we want to save it. And not only we want to save it, we want to save it in our collection. So let's click over here, save as, and let's give it a more meaningful name. And in this case, again, I'll say get all tasks. And of course, we're looking for task manager. So this is going to be saved in this collection. And we simply click on save. So if I take a look at my task manager, now, of course, I have get all tasks where we use the global variable and we can successfully see our string. And now I'll close a few of these tabs because it's getting quite busy. And let's do the same thing for the rest of them. So in this case, I'm going to be testing the create one, the one for the post. That's why we need to change the method. That's the first thing you want to do. Then we'll go with our URL. Again, we'll close it out / and then tasks. And remember, now we want to send some data, correct? Now, we're not doing anything with that data on a server, but just for the kicks, why don't we send it? I'm going to go here with body. Then we're looking for the raw. And of course, we're not looking for text. We're looking for the JSON. We just need to make sure that we use the correct syntax. And in this case, I'll say name, and that will be equal to testing. And we just click on send. And if we can see create task, we are in good shape. Now, since I also want to test out whether my middleware is working, I'm going to go back to my controllers. I'm looking for create task. And in here, instead of just going with send, we're going to go with a JSON. So now I'll be sending back the JSON and I'll pass in reg.body. So if you want, of course, you can console log it on a server. But in my case, I think it's going to be faster if I just send back whatever I'm getting from the client. So if we go back and if we change this around and we'll say here, shake and bake. And if we add a comma and then completed, we set to true. Once we send, that should be our response. And of course, the only thing that's left to do as far as the create route is go to save as, and then we'll say create task. Save it. And now let's continue. Again, I'll close these ones just so it's not that busy. And in this case, I want to go with get route. Then we want to go here with the URL again. And of course, we haven't set up the database, so there's no real ID, but we can definitely test it out if we just go with tasks and then whatever gibberish. So in this case, I'm going to go with hello. So that's going to be my ID. So we're not sending anything as far as data, but we are using the params. Again, if we take a look at the routes, we can clearly see that we have / and then ID. That is going to be our param. And if we want to test it out, where we have get task, of course, we have the request, and the ID is sitting in the params. So in here, I'll do the same thing. I'll say JSON, and we'll just say ID, and that one is equal to rec, params, and the ID. So if we save here, and then go back and just use the get route and click send, we have the key with the name of ID, and then the value is hello. So if we'll change it around and if we'll say Peter, of course, the value will be Peter. Again, same spiel. We go with save as, and we'll name this update task, or I'm sorry, get single task. My apologies, get single task. We'll save it, and then we have two more. We have one for update and one for remove. And in order to speed this up, I don't think I'm going to do any testing anymore. We simply want to open up a new route. We want to go with patch in this case. And again, we're going with URL and then / tasks, whatever value you want to pass in over here. So I'm going to go with 1, 2, 3, send. And of course, I have update task. Beautiful. Let's save that one. And we'll write here update and task. And the last one, of course, is delete. So let's close these two. And again, new request. We're looking for delete method. The URL is going to be exactly the same. And then we want to go with / tasks and then any of the IDs that we have already used, since we'll change that later anyway. And once we send, the response should be delete the task. Now, if you don't want to go with save as, you can simply click on Command S. That's going to be a shortcut. And we go here with delete and then task. And of course, we save it in the same task manager.
Hey, what's up, Polyman? How you doing, buddy?
Once we can clearly see that we can access all our routes correctly, then we can move on to our next topic. Okay. And once we're done with the Postman, before we start setting up our database, let's quickly talk about our routes. More specifically, why we use such structure. Long story short, it's because we're building a REST API. And since these days, the term API is used pretty much for everything, let's just all agree that in our case, since we're building a server, essentially we want to create a HTTP interface. So the other apps, most likely front-end ones, can interact with our data. That's how we view API in this scenario. And when it comes to REST, it stands for Representational State Transfer, and arguably it's the most popular API design pattern. And essentially, it's a pattern that combines HTTP verbs, route paths, and our resources, aka data. So effectively, REST determines how the API looks like. Now, let me emphasize something. It's a pattern, not a strictly enforced set of rules. So nothing stops you from setting your own API in totally different manner. In fact, if you have used APIs on your front-end apps, you know that some of them have totally different structure. I guess the best advice I can give you is this. Whatever pattern you decide on, stick with it. Or in other words, be consistent. Otherwise, it's just going to be very confusing for your users. And this is a common approach where you have the main list. So that could be orders, that could be customers, that could be items, whatever. And of course, in our case, it is tasks. And in order to get all the items, we go with get method. And then if we want to create one, it's going to be the same endpoint, but we just go with different method. And of course, in this case, it is post. And not to be redundant, we already discussed this before, but just because they have the same URL, the same endpoint, since the methods are different, in this case, we have get, and of course, in the second scenario, we have post. These are two totally different requests. Please keep that in mind. And then,
what's up, Polyman? What do you got going on, man? What you doing, dude?
For individual item, you have the same path pretty much. So you have API and then tasks, orders, customers, or whatever. And then you just use the params to point to that one specific item. And then if you want to get the item, then of course it is a get method. For update, you'll use put or patch. And then
you got nothing.
You'll use the delete method instead. And since JSON is a common format for receiving and sending data in REST API, we'll use that approach as well. So even though at the moment we use send method in our routes, eventually we'll switch to JSON method instead. Also, I would like to point out that REST in general is somewhat fuzzy. In fact, oftentimes you'll deviate away from straight up REST since that's what the setup will require. One more thing, you can probably notice something. Essentially, our API allows our user to perform a CRUD operations on our data, and CRUD stands for create, read, update, and destroy. And it's a common approach where the API interface is built around CRUD, since those are usually or typically operations that users or apps want to perform on a given data, whether it is, again, users, orders, customers, or in our case, of course, it is going to be a task. And we'll return to CRUD a little later when I can actually show you how it relates to our data.
Making some
Lastly,
money.
there's obviously more to REST, and some of that we will discuss in later projects. But since I'm not a big fan of long slide videos, and I believe we covered all the major points, we'll stop right here and move on to our database setup. If you remember, in Express tutorial, the route setup was extremely similar to that we have right now, with one big caveat. We used basic array to store some list of items on our server. And based on the request, we performed some kind of operation on the list and then send back the response. And of course, that is not very serious approach to store our data. And therefore, starting with this project, we'll set up and connect to a proper database. And pretty much for the remainder of the course, we'll use NoSQL or non-relational database by the name of MongoDB. Now, I'm not going to dwell on differences between non-relational and relational databases, as well as pros and cons for each of them. But the major difference is that unlike traditional database, where we have rows and columns, in MongoDB, we can simply store everything as JSON. And basically, it doesn't care how the data relates to each other. Instead of tables, we have collections, which represent a group of items. And instead of rows, we have documents, which represent single item. And a document is a set of key value pairs. And as far as data types, we can use strings, numbers, arrays, objects, and many more. It's very easy to get started. And even though you can set it up on your local machine as well, we'll right away go for cloud option, since that's something you'll probably end up doing anyway. We'll use MongoDB Atlas, which is a official option. Basically, it's created by the same people who created MongoDB. And since they offer generous free tier, you'll just have to create an account and you'll be good to go. And once we're familiar with MongoDB, let's set up and configure MongoDB Atlas so we can host and manage our data in the cloud. I have the account already, but since I want to cover all the steps in detail, I'll set up another dummy account together. And remember, we can set up the entire thing for free. So don't worry, your credit card can stay nicely tucked away in.
Mm. They want to set up a MongoDB account. All right, fuck it. Sorry I missed your stuff for some time. Did I run Elden Ring? I did Elden Ring for a little bit. A few days. I never finished the game though. I got tilted. Stopped playing it. Didn't go back. I was supposed to spend the next few hours doing this fucking JavaScript stuff, but my brain is fucking tired. I might just go to bed. A long day. Long night last night. Long day. Oh, what is today? Today is Friday? Today Friday? It is. Well, that's good actually. If it's Friday, that means I can just get some sleep tonight and then I can be up here and do my whole stream this whole weekend. Hey, yo, I think I sent you a DM, maybe on Discord. Let me know what the plan is for the expansion and what I need to do to prepare and all that stuff. I think I will play. I think I will play. But I want to make sure if I do decide to play, I'll be prepared to do so. That way I make sure I, fill the role I need to fill, and I'm ready to go and all that shit. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call it. I think I'm gonna go to sleep, get some rest. It's Friday. That means I can just sleep tonight. I can do a long ass strain this weekend. But I'll catch you guys. I'll catch you tonight. I'll be on tonight pretty early, probably like at 7 p.m. Central, and then I'll be on all night long and all day and all night. At least I'll probably do at least a 36-hour stream. Yeah, dude, just send me the fucking gist, man. I'll get it taken care of. Take it easy, friends. Woohoo!